When my younger sister Laura was born, I had to get used to sharing the limelight. I sort of learned how to do this, but then Hannah arrived, and I did not know what to make of this person who is just totally surplus. I think I just pretended she wasn't there. But many years later, when I was about 8, I began to get an idea that this girl child was developing her own unique characteristics, a personality that came with a label. I remember it was one of those nights when it was dark early, so maybe it was late autumn, and I was walking home behind my mom and a friend of hers as they had just talked about what the kindergarten teacher had told them about their kids. Apparently, Hannah had just started going to school, and this was Mom's first parent-teacher conference with Hannah's teacher. I remember hearing my mom say in the gloom of that chilly night that Hannah's teacher said she was a fidgeter. I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew when Mom's friends said the dreaded words, "Oh dear, this was not going to turn out very well for her." And now look where we are today. Fidgeter. Someone who will not sit still. It just shows how rarely we know a prophecy until it's well behind us. By the time she embarked on her own life, raising her kids, usually alone, by her own resources, stitched together out of very hard work, very good friends, and very thin air, it was clear to me that Hannah was not going to just sit there and take what was thrown her way. She couldn't give a toss for received dogmas, ideologies, or even gossip, really, unless it was quite good. She sought evidence where she could find it, and if it wasn't there, she just walked past it. Living in Wakulla helped her to do that successfully, I think. It was such a sparsely populated place in those days that if you knew anyone there, they were probably your friend. Betty Carter probably saved her sanity in those days, if not her life. Wakulla kept her free from being judged for how she chose to live her life so that she could just dig in and live it. But yet she somehow attracted friends from around the country, people who would spend, often it was mushroom season, I think, camping out in her front yard, singing around fires at night, swimming naked at stinking springs during the daytime. You get the picture. She worked for a few years at the Wakulla Springs Hotel. One day during her stint as a waitress there, I drove in to pick her up from work and saw her chatting with an older lady outside. I went over to be introduced, and the lady started telling me how much fun it was to work with Hannah, but mentioned slyly that everyone knew that the words Wildlife Refuge had to be added to the corporate name of Wakulla Springs in order to justify hiring her, as if she wanted to add, because everyone knows. One of those things that everyone who knew her knew was how fiercely she valued her independence, and also how generous she was. Even though she didn't have a lot back in those days, she always had a lot of time to listen and to take people as they were. I remember she turned herself inside out to be there for our mother after our dad died. But even more, to create a space for her kids to grow and inherit that sense of independence, generosity, fair-mindedness, and God knows what else. When I got to know those kids again during that Thanksgiving in 2015 on the Atlantic coast, I was so happy to see what a sense of self each of them had. Karen, Becky, Adrian, what wonderful partners they had cast their lots with, and all those kids running around calling each other cousin. I think all of us will remember how easily Hannah always said the words, "I love you." Her ragtag dedication to the well-being of her kids also had an outward focus as she came to dedicate herself in what retrospectively we might call a career. I was off living in DC around the time that Hannah met her new heroes, around 1987, I think. A couple of guys who were Tallahassee's original garage bench entrepreneurs. And she went to work with their newly formed, most understated company name in the history of corporations company, Gates That Open. Talk about a clear mission statement. She found a place to work that, like herself, wouldn't sit still. She developed a few new habits, those often associated with people as they grow into society, and some new skills. She was quite proud of her workmates and being associated with them. Her polished up skills in sales and customer liaison saw her travel all over the States. She loved it. But she couldn't sit still, at least not under her own control. As the company grew, changed shape, changed owners, and moved far away from its agile, hippie-loving origins into an assertive, more buttoned-up corporation, Hannah finally learned that appearing to sit still had a value. She learned how to do it, at least strategically. Her new work environment eventually became another source of pride for her, happiness for her, and a sense of personal identification, I think. She grew to love the new incarnation, and from everything she said about her colleagues, many of them grew to love the new her, too. I remember when she came to spend some time with us in New Zealand, when we lived on Waiheke Island. I took a photo of her from my kitchen, a beautiful shot that I can't find now, of her with her back to me, sitting out on the front deck of our house wearing a big floppy straw hat, her feet up on the rail, reading a book, and looking silently to that silver line that was the horizon of the South Pacific. It was a touching moment, in part because it was one of those few spaces I ever shared with her where she wasn't talking. I was always impressed with Hannah's love for reading. She read widely, both fiction, nonfiction, science, art, and she read critically. I always delighted in her pithy reviews of the books that she had read. She always found them worthwhile, except for some odd plot device that didn't work or something. She was curious and ready to learn to think more broadly. I think that was a hallmark feature of Hannah's personality. Ready to learn to think more broadly, I think became the way she was able to still keep fidgeting. When she came to visit us in New Zealand, the only made in the USA souvenirs she bought were 3 Mighty Mule beefy tees. Now, I wore those shirts daily or nightly for nearly 12 years before they finally simply decomposed. So to those of you from GTO Access who might hear this, thank you for being Hannah's heroes for so long, and especially in these last few months, especially in light of the new set of changes in your company. The only thing more difficult for her to come to terms with than the end stage of her health condition was the fact that she could not go back to work with you. But coming to terms with that started her on again, off again, peaceful transition to an acceptance of her life and its end. In one of our last phone conversations, she reflected that she wasn't sure that it would all happen as it did, but that it all turned out pretty good, as she said, in the long run. In the long run. She finally came to sit still and accept what life was throwing at her, and to plan wisely for it. Our mother would have been proud. I hope her beautiful and handsome kids and grandkids and great-grandkids will be proud of her too. I'm not saying that you should sit still. It probably doesn't pay to until you really have to. But Hannah certainly showed us the value of doing just that when the time is right. She ran the race well, crossed her finish line exhausted and out of breath, but pleased with herself, I think. Now she is able to wander around in our memories, to simply roam, to walk in warm, dappled grass, and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon and the golden apples of the sun.